We are live.
Hello and welcome to this week's What's the Tea episode. I am Lysandra Hutchinson, the Community Resource Specialist here at ANU, and I have a special guest today. Today is joining the tea is Olivia Farrell. She is going to go ahead and introduce herself right now.
Yes, hi. I am Olivia Farrell. I am the Director of Policy, Advocacy, and Research for an organization called the Network Advocating Against Domestic Violence.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Olivia. So guys, today, go ahead, take the time to share this episode. Go ahead and push share, invite your friends, invite your colleagues, let them know we're here live. We're going to have an amazing, exciting episode where we're going to talk about domestic violence, advocacy and policy. And so that is Olivia's area of expertise, and she's really on the front lines of that work, especially in Illinois. And so we're going to learn more about the policies in domestic violence policy work and the advocacy work that she does at the network. So, Olivia, let's start with, if you don't mind, just giving us an idea of what brought you to this work to begin with and how long you've been at the network.
Yeah, of course. So I joined the network a little over 2 years ago. Started in policy and advocacy. I kind of was promoted to the director role recently, but have always been in sort of this policy realm. And that has sort of been where I've been in the field for a while now. I'm originally from Arizona, and I was doing some work at an organization there focusing on policy work related to the child welfare system. But I was always really kind of interested in these gendered issues. I spent many years volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, and sort of the more I became involved in this work, the more I was really drawn to it and felt the need to kind of work on these issues and try to make a difference. So I moved to Chicago to get my master's in public policy from the University of Chicago. And once I knew I was coming here, I really started looking for organizations that did the policy work related to these issues. And of course, the network kind of came up quite a few times. So, one thing led to another, and now I'm here.
Awesome. That's awesome. So since you've been at the network, and for those actually that are listening that may not have a good sense of what policy is, can you just explain what is domestic violence policy and advocacy work? What does that really mean? What's the purpose of it? What goes into that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great question because when I tell people my job all the time, they're like, what does that mean? I think some of my family members still have no idea what I do.
Yeah.
But so there's kind of a lot of moving parts. So at the network, we really focus on policies related to the state and local level. So we work a lot with the city, so folks at the mayor's office and city council members to look at the ways, the policies and funding structures that are in place to address gender-based violence within the city. And then similarly at the state level, so we look at policies that are being presented at the state legislature and kind of evaluate those on how they might impact survivors. And then based on that sort of analysis, either advocate for or against a certain bill, and sometimes we'll work with lawmakers to kind of craft that legislation as well if there's a specific issue we really want to tackle. But all of that kind of comes from the research aspect of my work. So we put out a large annual report every year, kind of giving an overview of the issue throughout the state. But throughout the year, we do ongoing reports and things like that that are really driven by service providers and what we're hearing from them, as well as interviews with survivors themselves. We're always trying to really uplift survivor voices and have their firsthand experiences be the driving force behind our advocacy. So what were their experiences? What did they need? What do they need? And how can we kind of work to better the services and the services that are available to them?
That's awesome. Wow. So when we talked before today, I was really intrigued because it sounds like you actually do a lot of research in your position. And so can you talk a little bit about that? How do you go about collecting data? How do you go, is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? What is the behind the scenes of that part?
Yeah, so it's a little of everything. Gender-based violence and specifically domestic violence has a lot of the movement has been around sort of keeping things confidential and
Yeah.
protecting the anonymity of survivors, which in doing so has kind of left these like big gaps in the data that we're constantly working to fill and kind of understand. So when we're doing any sort of research, we're collecting data. We'll do like quantitative data from different state and city organizations. So for example, I'll usually submit a FOIA request to CPD on how many calls they're getting, how many cases they're seeing, arrests, things like that. The network also runs the state domestic violence hotline, so we'll look at those calls, who's calling, what are they calling for, what services, what are they really needing. We'll also look at who's getting benefits. The Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority runs a database called InfoNet that a lot of service providers utilize, and they enter in a lot of information about the services they offer, how many hours, how many individuals, all of that. And so we'll look at all of these pieces and kind of try to piece together the different areas, the different services that survivors might be needing. And then of course, always supplemented with sort of this more qualitative data. We'll do surveys with service providers, informational interviews, and with the survivors themselves, and really learning from them. Though consistently, what we hear from them is, what is being shown in the data as well. It's just a matter of kind of piecing it together.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And it's a lot that goes into that. As you said before, like there's these moving parts and there's all these different players, because on our side, we're providing services. So we're the people putting the data in InfoNet, and like making sure we have all the data. And as we're working, we're collecting a lot of data. So I think hearing it from your end also provides a big picture into how we're all working together in this movement and in this work to make sure that victims and survivors have the support they need, and that there's funding for these programs, right? Give us a sense of some of your most recent wins, I want to call it that, like recent policy wins, or some of the priorities that you guys have had maybe this past year.
Yeah. So I think we were fortunate this past year to see a lot of big wins. A lot of that was really looking at the budget, so both for the city and at the county level. So we did a lot of advocacy around sort of the need for increased funding based off of wait lists and just lack of capacity every year. Thousands of survivors are turned away because service providers just can't meet the need. So really advocating on that. And so this year, or rather for the coming fiscal year, the city has allocated $35 million for gender-based violence services, which is a $25 million increase.
Wow.
Which is huge. And similarly, at the county level, we're seeing a larger investment, and beyond, the funding, which is huge, also kind of seeing that analysis and uplifting of this issue to really focus on, what services are truly needed and how can we better the services. Meeting the need and capacity is a huge piece, but also being very intentional about what those services look like. So looking at culturally competent services, looking at language access, looking at, what are the needs of the survivors, and how can we meet that beyond just, not beyond just expanding services, how can we better those services as well?
That's amazing. how do you think that the pandemic, or how did COVID-19 pandemic impact maybe the legislators' understanding of domestic violence, or their commitment, or even the way that you guys approach your work? Do you think it impacted it? And if so, how?
Yes, absolutely. There was definitely an impact. So the really the issue of domestic violence across the board, across the world,
The
really,
world, yeah.
Was really escalated during COVID-19. When you have folks who are forced to quarantine at home, that isolation, for a lot of folks, that meant being isolated with someone who was harming them. And it was, creating additional barriers to accessing resources. There were more financial stressors, health stressors, and even just some of those other informal supports that people might rely on, like being able to crash on a friend's couch, was much more difficult when everyone's, concerned about this deadly virus.
Yeah.
And so that was something that was reflected in a lot of the data we saw. So specifically with the hotline, calls were just shot through the roof, a huge increase in calls, and being able to have that data and share some of these stories with elected officials. They were all really moved. And even we found, particularly at the local level, some of the older people we met with, a lot of them were saying, I'm having constituents come into my office who are dealing with these issues. How can I better serve them? And, they were seeing firsthand sort of this issue right before them, as, constituents are coming in needing help, and said, what do we do?
Yeah.
And so we were very fortunate to have a lot of support of folks who, were seeing this impact, and, really made it their issue area to push for these changes, to push for increased funding, and really take up this issue, and really are passionate about it.
Wow. That's powerful. In terms of your work, and the challenges, right? Because there's all these different players involved. Are there ever places where you guys hit the wall and you're like, there's no movement that can be made here, or we thought we were going to have support here, but now we don't? How do you navigate? What are the challenges here, and how do you navigate them?
Yeah, I mean, that is truly the nature of working in policy. Is there's definitely times when, we think we have a slam dunk of a piece of legislation and that it should pass through without any issues, and then suddenly there's a huge debate and maybe it doesn't get passed through. And I think, that is without a doubt very challenging. There's no way around that. But I think we have to kind of work to not let it be, not view it as hitting the wall, or not letting it defeat us. If the bill doesn't pass this session, we hope that it won't get through the next session. And we saw that with the budget advocacy. This increase was huge, but it had been like 18 months of working on this issue, and the previous year we had only gotten $2 million additional. So you just gotta keep at it and not lose steam. And it's definitely challenging work. It's a difficult issue, and even though the majority of my work at the policy level is not directly with survivors, we're still hearing all these stories. We're still seeing the impact of this issue in a lot of different ways. But it's about, not letting that defeat us, but rather using that as motivation and a reminder of why we're doing this work, and igniting that flame to keep the passion going.
Yeah, that's so good. That's kind of what I was going to ask you next. What keeps you going? What fuels you guys, and helps you not run out of steam?
Yeah. And I mean, it's, just as many losses as we get wins too, that are very exciting. I mentioned volunteering at a shelter back in Arizona. And I remember they have like this holiday store where the woman could come in and get all sorts of gifts to be able to have like a, Christmas celebration.
Oh, nice.
And there was this mom that came in and I was helping her kind of sort through everything. And she left with, 2 giant bags of toys and things for her kids. But I remember she paused and she hugged me and she was crying. And, she spoke about how she didn't know how she was going to be able to give gifts for her kids that year, and that with all of this, it's actually going to be like their biggest Christmas.
Wow.
And she was just like overwhelmed. And, moving into the policy field, don't quite get those experiences anymore. But I still, I think about it. And, when we talk about wins like the budget, 25 million, 35 million, it feels very abstract. But I know like that funding, it all funnels back down into service providers and to survivors themselves. And,
Yeah.
they're having those moments where, survivors are getting the help they need and are having those moments where, maybe it's being able to get their kid a gift for Christmas or just have somewhere safe to be at night. And those things are huge.
Yeah, awesome. That is so awesome. You guys are, well, I think it's important, like you're painting this picture, and it's the reality is that often systemic change is really slow. And, I think that you probably are coming into this work, it sounds like, knowing that they're going to feel like there's these times where you're taking steps up, but then times where you feel like you're taking steps back. And like you're saying, it takes this perseverance. I also think that you guys are not, like you talked about, not just new policy, but better policy that deals with cultural competency and, helps down to the nuance of the experience of the survivors. How important do you think that is? And do you think that the way you all are approaching this work at the network, that's common? Or do you think that there is a need for more people doing this policy work to understand more about the nuances that are impacting survivors of domestic violence?
Yeah, I feel like a lot to that question.
Yes, a lot to that question.
But I think it's such an important one. I think the network, in the few years I've been with them, I've seen it firsthand, but I think it goes beyond that. There's been a lot of changes in how we approach things. And I think really the larger gender-based violence community right now is really grappling with the fact that for decades we relied on the carceral system and really made gender-based violence a carceral issue, and that didn't work for so many survivors, particularly survivors of color. And so how do we kind of undo that, and how do we create services that work for the survivors who are left behind? And that is certainly not an easy task. And I think, the network has really made this one of our big issues. We have a decarceration committee that is really looking to analyze these things and bring this new sort of viewpoint to this work. But it is ongoing conversations in the community.
Yeah.
And I do think, we're all learning and growing. And, for many people who have been doing this work for decades, it's hard to kind of, break away and try something new. And it is new. We've been talking with the city about having a non-law enforcement based crisis response for domestic violence. And that would be sort of the first of its kind. There's been different co-responder models, but to have a advocate first response would be brand new, and that is very scary. We're all data people. We want to show that everything is evidence-based, but at some point we get to these
trailblazing.
We get to these points where we just have to say, there's evidence to show why this should work and why, and we know the current system doesn't work, so we got to try something new. And it is very, very scary, but so important. And I think that's it's being reflected in what we see with survivors and service providers as they are able to reach people who haven't been historically reached and are able to do more. And there is a long way to go, and we have member organizations who do a lot of work with specific cultural groups, and who will tell you all about the problems they still face, and language access and all of that. But we're working on it one step at a time. But yeah, we all have to really work together as a community to get these things across the board.
Yeah, that's awesome though. That's amazing that you guys are just the intentionality behind it, making sure that that everybody is represented and all these different communities are getting the help that they need, and that it is really helpful, that things are really helpful. And I think it speaks to the fact that it takes a lot of intentionality to stay very current with the research and with the experiences of how policy is impacting people in their everyday lives. So that's pretty amazing. And it's like your mind has to be in almost a panoramic view, right? All the time.
Yes.
So I think you kind of spoke to this already, but I'll just ask you, what have you found to be the most rewarding aspect of this work? And how do you create more of it or capitalize on it?
Yeah, I mean, anytime we have a success where we get a bill or we get a policy passed, or even sometimes it's even starting the conversation. Sometimes that's the biggest win, is getting someone to listen to you about changing these things. And we continue to try to build on those, but in terms of kind of growing that out more, I think the strength of the network really comes from the community and having folks pay attention and pay attention to what bills are coming up, what's happening at the state and local level, and being engaged and making calls and signing on to letters and showing their support and showing elected officials that they care, that they're watching, really makes a difference. And so anytime we can sort of rally the community to get behind these issues and come out and show their support, always will help us sort of get more of those successes that really are so rewarding.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That kind of segues into what I was going to say. How can people be involved with policy and advocacy work? You mentioned making calls to your legislator. And is it that are you guys holding certain meetings where people can come if someone's like watching this and they want to be involved in this process? What can they do? What steps can they take?
Yeah, so I would encourage anyone who wants to get involved to check out our website, the-network.org. We have a whole policy and advocacy page. You can sign up for a newsletter and we'll send out policy alerts. So the bills we're watching, and when they're going to be heard at a hearing, and who we think you should call, and what talking points you might be able to use.
That's good.
And, signing up for other email alerts as well. There's a lot of organizations doing a lot of great work out there. So listening to, the things they're advocating for or against, and, just being aware, engaged, making those calls, showing up to different events, definitely all makes a difference. And, anything, it can be, whatever capacity people have, but there's a lot you can do even from the comfort of your own home to show your support.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's absolutely amazing. For those that don't know about the network, can you just give us an overview of the organization in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So the network has been around for quite a few years now. We formed as a membership-based organization. So it was really a group of service providers in the city who felt there needed to be more sort of city advocacy for the needs they were seeing from survivors, that they felt just weren't being heard.
Mhm.
And so right now we have, I think, just shy of 40 member organizations who are all service providers throughout the state who, you know, work with survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking. Um, and they really work with us to share what they're seeing on the ground and drive our policy and advocacy work. We also have a large training department. So we do the traditional domestic violence 40-hour training, but we've also been working on a lot of trainings related to sort of these changing systems we've been talking about. So we have a annual social justice and domestic violence conference every year, where we kind of dive into these different issue areas, and then we also run the hotline, as I said
Mhm.
earlier, which is for throughout the state. You can call, text, or go online and chat, all anonymous, for folks who need help, or if you have a friend or family member or whoever it might be that you're concerned about, you can also call and even just get some information about what resources of steps folks can take to get help.
Mhm. Awesome. Awesome. This has been great. I'm going to ask Angie if there's any questions in our chat.
Okay, so first, you are thanked for being on the Tea episode today. And a question for you, Olivia. Would you please describe a typical work week for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I chuckle because I say there's no typical work week. I feel like anytime I say I have a slow day, there's suddenly a barrage of calls of something going on, and that's truly how policy works. You have to be on your toes. There's always things changing. You have to be alert. A lot of it is spent researching things, whether it's looking at bills or working on our reports. Looking at, when we were working on the budget advocacy, there was a lot of research into what other cities did for their budget, gathering that information on wait lists and making a case, having a lot of meetings with elected officials, sending out alerts to folks. There's a lot of writing things, whether it's handouts, reports, things like that. And yeah, I mean, really, it's just being responsive to the requests we're getting for information, whether it be, for a news story, for an elected official, or even just, an individual in the community who needs help and is trying to find resources. Just kind of being available and responding to things as they happen.
Awesome. Awesome.
And other than that, that is all the questions we have for you right now.
Okay. Okay. So that's all the questions we have right now. Olivia, are there any announcements that you wanted to make in terms of things that you want people to know, maybe that will catch this interview, some initiatives that you guys are working on at the network that we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, things slow down a little bit as we approach the holidays, but January is always a hectic month. We'll fall into the legislative session. So, if folks want to be aware, really want to be engaged in what's happening, like I said, please sign up for our news alerts.
Yeah.
And be on the lookout for everything. We recently set our policy priorities for the next year, which are available on our website, but really are looking at a lot of the things we've discussed, looking at how we can expand funding for services, how we can look at these more non-carceral services, building on that. working with criminalized survivors and language access and all of these really sort of important issues. And I would really say, we, our power comes from the community, as I said. And so we always love to hear from you. Check out our website, give us a call, give us an email around, what are your thoughts around these issues? What would you like to see us sort of advocate for? How can we better serve the community? Because at the end of the day, that's really what this is about making a stronger, safer, better community for everyone.
It's awesome. So you guys heard it. Be sure to sign up for the network. The news, is it a newsletter? Newsletter.
So we have newsletter as well as separate policy alerts. So
you guys be sure to go to the website, sign up for both. Make sure that this is an opportunity to really let your voices be heard, and for all of us to have a voice in this work. I love that. I love that you guys have your ear to the ground, that you guys are collecting data from service providers, hearing stories of survivors, because I think people often don't understand that there are some policymakers who are completely out of touch with the realities of the lives of the people that they're making legislation for. They don't even know how the policies are impacting the people. And so it's part of our job to make sure that they know and that there's legislation out there that's actually helpful, that's beneficial, that's nuanced, that's trauma informed, that, it's culturally competent. That's all the things that we understand because we're doing the work, but that maybe a legislator may be completely ignorant to, right? So yeah, this has been amazing. Any final words you want to share or final thoughts?
I just want to thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's watching. Like I've said, I'm going to say it 10 more times. We can't do it without all of you. And so just, really appreciate being here, appreciate the folks who are watching and listening and who care about these issues, because it really, it matters. And, change is hard, but we do it one step at a time, one person at a time. So
yeah, awesome. Olivia, thank you. First of all, thank you for the work that you're doing. Just thank you on behalf of everyone for just the work that you're doing and that you're putting in on these issues. And thank you for taking the time out to be here on What's the Tea. Angie, are there any other questions in the chat? Just check in.
No, that is actually all we have.
All right, awesome. Well, I want to thank all of you guys for watching today. Thank you for being here. Be sure to join us for our next tea next week. We will be here again every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, same time, same place, different tea. Thanks. Bye. Thanks, Olivia.
thank you.